Hey everybody, young film critics, John Ty, whoever else is around. Welcome to what, believe it or not, is week 7 of Young Film Critics this year. Um, and our screening of one of the great legendary movies of American film, a film that's completely unbelievable that it came out of Hollywood. I'm talking about Nicholas Ray's 1955 classic, Rebel Without a Cause, which kind of fits in nicely with this theme that sort of developed over the year, kind of accidentally, about teenagers and 20-somethings. And we've seen that happen in modern ways in Fruitvale Station, in Dear White People, and in Sin Nombre. And we took one trip back in time with Masculine Feminine and Jean-Luc Godard's take on teenagers in the 60s. Now we're going back to sort of the origins of that mode in the mid 50s, and a film coming out of Hollywood, which is almost impossible to believe, as you'll see. I am not here for the happiest of reasons, assuming all goes well. I'm in Minneapolis right now, speaking at the National Council of Teachers of English conference, presenting, and then, which I'll tell you about more when I get back, I am off to Africa, to the Ivory Coast, on a project that I will tell you guys all about that I'm really looking forward to, and more on that later. But let's talk about Rebel a little bit and what you're going to see, although it's pretty straightforward. Let's start with a couple of the personalities that you have to deal with when you're dealing with this film. First, and by far the most important, is the actor playing the lead part of Jim Stark, in this film, and that is the legendary James Dean. James Dean had come out of nowhere, literally, in the mid 50s, and became in only 3 films the sort of representation of young Hollywood, of the new style of acting. He and Marlon Brando represented a real break from the old-fashioned Jimmy Stewart, Cary Grant kind of mannered acting, and this was much more passionate and intense. What they called the method back in those days, for those of you who are acting fans. Dean did only 3 films in his entire life. He had done East of Eden, which is based on the John Steinbeck novel, where he played the lead, Cal Trask. And he did Rebel Without a Cause and his last film, Giant, but before those 2 were released, he died in a car crash at age 24. In 1955, and so you want to talk about the metaphor of, a meteor burning bright across the sky and then burning out. That was Dean. I mean, and yet in those 3 films made a powerful, powerful mark on American scene. And I don't think you'll have seen acting like this in American film. And it was really, truly revolutionary for its time. The other person we have to talk about, since this is Young Film Critics, of course, is the director, and that would be one of the great, I hate to use the word because the Republicans have killed it, but mavericks of American film, Nicholas Ray. And Nick Ray was a complete and total badass, hard-drinking, smoking, bad boy, who somehow managed to survive in the studio system from 1949, his first film, through the early 60s, when everyone kind of got tired of him and no one would hire him anymore, at which point he went off and became a film professor. Rebel is Ray's high point, all right, but I have 3 other Ray films to strongly recommend. Ray, unlike a lot of other directors, is not associated with a particular genre, but his films kind of do express, either directly or indirectly, this very powerful undercurrent of dissension and disruption just below the surface. Because when you think of America in 1955, when Rebel came out, you think of, perfect suburban houses and Father Knows Best and white picket fences and beautiful suburbs. And as we know, especially if you weren't white or middle class or wealthy, just below that surface was a lot of stuff brewing. And Ray sort of captured that. So the three other Ray films that I strongly recommend are In a Lonely Place from 1950, which is Humphrey Bogart's best performance, I think, even better than Casablanca. And just a wonderful, dark, really dark detective story. 1954's Johnny Guitar, one of the campiest westerns ever made, and yet right below the surface. Again, that's how Ray operates. It is a metaphor for what was going on with McCarthyism and the anti-communist witch hunts that, if you've ever read Miller's The Crucible in school, you'll know about. And finally, a lesser known one, but one that I love, 1958's Bigger Than Life, with James Mason as a suburban husband who gets hooked on, I guess, the equivalent of what was 5-hour energy drinks back in those days, and kind of loses himself. It's really interesting and ahead of its time. And then there's Rebel. You also need to talk a little bit about the other two actors who have the major parts. Young Natalie Wood, who went on to become a huge star in Hollywood. If you've seen West Side Story, she plays Maria, as Judy, the good girl who, is attracted to James Dean's bad guy, Jim. And the very, very young Sal Mineo, who plays Plato in the film. And this central structure of the film is really that none of them have a family that works for different reasons. And so what you'll see slowly evolve over the course of the film is that Jim and Judy and Plato sort of form their own kind of alternative family as father, mother, and child, respectively. This is going to look kind of tame to you, right? The badass guys are not going to look badass. But again, try to see this through those 1955 eyes. And you can see how people kind of were excited about it. Had Dean not died, it might have not been as big a hit, but it certainly stands now as maybe, I don't want to take it too far, but what you can see in Rebel Without a Cause in 1955 is the beginning of what later became, in the 60s, what everybody now refers to as the generation gap, about rebellious kids, about the breakup of the traditional American family, how that was just a sort of a superficial lie, and below that the kids were miserable and angry, and there wasn't a particular reason for it. On the surface they had everything they needed, but still there was this discontent with how conformist that period was. So hence the Rebel Without a Cause. And you really sort of get to see that here. And also, if you know a little bit about the literature of the day, it coincided with the movement that was called the Beat movement, the Beat poetry movement. And if you don't know that stuff, that's some stuff you should definitely check out. Allen Ginsberg, the great poet of the Beat movement, published Howl, his great poem that year. Jack Kerouac, the great novelist of the Beat movement, published On the Road in 1954. And so these became hugely influential on people like the Beatles and Bob Dylan and the people who sort of led the revolution that was coming. So in many ways you can say that when you watch Rebel Without a Cause, you're kind of watching the beginning of the 60s. It's pretty powerful stuff. Me again. So after you watch the film, among the things you'll want to talk about, of course, since this is Young Film Critics, is, how does Ray use those tools to sort of convey the tools of film, camera, edit, mise-en-scène? Especially notice the color. This, like many Ray films, is a film that is saturated with color. All right, from Jim's red jacket to it's all color is really in your face. Um, Talk about how Ray uses the tools of film, going beyond the script, to convey the sense of discomfort and unease that that young generation was starting to feel that later became so influential on others. Also, you might want to talk about the portrayal of the adults in the film is very, very interesting. I mean, it's very clear, for example, that Jim's father, played by the great character actor of the '50s, Jim Backus, is a very feminized kind of character. We see him in an apron all the time, doing what was then considered women's work around the house in the time, and being totally controlled and dominated by his wife, and which is a major reason why Jim has no respect for his dad and strikes out in rebellion. Judy rebels for different reasons, and Plato basically doesn't even have a family. So that was starting to happen too. So check out the portrayal of the adults, and notice that the police detective, played by Edward Platt, another great character actor, is the closest that Jim finds to a father figure, and that's kind of an interesting relationship there. Also, pay attention to the setting. Especially at the end. The ending is set in the Griffith Observatory in LA, in the planetarium, and it's just a really, really different and odd and interesting choice. And it makes for some really interesting and thoughtful watching. And that's about it. So, wish me luck in my travels, and I certainly wish you guys luck in yours. And I wish you the happiest of Thanksgivings. See as many good movies as you can. I'm excited to read your reviews. You know, please, please, please be nasty. You know, rip the reviewer to shreds, as I described last week. I'm really hoping that you will. But remember also, please, to always do it with text. All right, be specific in your examples as possible. When I come back on December 3rd, I'm going to show you a very short film, and I'm going to talk a lot about your final pieces, which are going to be about the movies that we saw together in class. So you don't have to make a final decision, and we're watching a couple of other pieces, but start to think about whether you want to write about Fruitvale. Do you want to write about Masculine Feminine? Do you want to write about Dear White People? Do you want to write about Sin Nombre? Do you want to write about Rebel? You won't have to make that decision for a little while, but I do want sort of, you to begin to think about that in the back of your minds. I love you guys. I miss you. But I'm out there doing good stuff. And I will see you on the other side of Thanksgiving. I will see you in early December. Be well, be safe, be happy. Have a great, great holiday.